Welcome to today's deep dive. So, I want you to take a second and think about the absolute most exhausted you have ever been, like in your entire life.
Oh yeah, that is a very specific feeling.
Right. You know the kind, where your limbs feel like lead, your brain is just totally foggy, and honestly, making even a simple decision feels like climbing a mountain.
Yeah, where just deciding what to eat for dinner is too much.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, I want you to imagine taking that profound, bone-deep level of exhaustion
Right.
and walking into a room of 30 teenagers.
Oh man, that sounds completely overwhelming.
It really does. And you're expected to manage their academic progress, their social conflicts, and on top of all that, their mental health crises.
It is a staggering scenario when you frame it that way. I mean, most people simply could not function in that environment. Yet that is the daily reality for a massive portion of our education workforce.
And that reality is the starting point for our session today. So we're looking at a very revealing stack of briefings and operational documents from an organization called MentalSpace School.
Yes, and for those interested, you can find them at mentalspaceschool.com.
Right. They are a provider of K-12 mental health support operating across Georgia. But our mission for this deep dive isn't just to look at how we support the kids.
Which is usually where the conversation stops, unfortunately.
Exactly. We are going to explore the entire modern school ecosystem to unpack a very hard truth found in these sources.
Yeah.
Basically, treating student mental health and ensuring actual school safety is fundamentally impossible without first addressing the hidden crisis of educator burnout.
It truly is the ultimate foundation. You know, we spend an incredible amount of time in education analyzing the structural integrity of the roof, so to speak.
Yeah, like student outcomes, test scores, all that.
Right, standardized test scores, campus safety protocols. But we routinely ignore the fact that the pillars holding the entire building up, the teachers themselves, are visibly cracking under the pressure.
Yeah, so before we can even begin to talk about how schools protect and support students, we have to look at the people standing at the front of the room.
We really do.
Because according to the briefings from MentalSpace School, burnout among educators is currently at an all-time high. And the signs they list in these documents aren't your typical, I need a long weekend kind of complaints.
Not at all. The documentation specifically highlights a kind of exhaustion that sleep just doesn't fix. It points to profound emotional numbness.
Wow.
Yeah, and a much shorter fuse than usual, plus that deep pit-in-your-stomach dread of Monday mornings.
Let's focus on that first concept for a second, because I think everyone listening to this has experienced being tired from a long week.
Sure, yeah.
But the way this briefing describes teacher burnout is different. It's like a smartphone with a severely degraded battery.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
Right. You plug it in all night, and when you wake up, the screen proudly says 100%. But the moment you unplug it and open a single app...
It just drains immediately.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The moment that teacher steps into the noisy hallway or answers a complex question from a student, the battery instantly drops to 20%. The capacity itself is just damaged.
That is a brilliant way to visualize it. I mean, it's not a lack of charging, it's a failure of the battery to hold the charge because it has been chronically overheated for way too long.
Which brings me to a really tough question.
Okay.
We constantly hear this cultural narrative that teaching is all about being there for the kids. It's always framed as this selfless calling.
Right, the whole martyr narrative.
Exactly.
Mm.
But if we follow the logic in these documents, is ignoring the teacher's mental health, like in the name of prioritizing the students, actually the quickest way to fail those kids?
What's fascinating here is the underlying neurology of what happens when a human being is placed in a caregiving role without adequate support.
Okay, tell me more about that.
Well, when we talk about a short fuse or emotional numbness, we aren't talking about a teacher who suddenly lost their passion for education. We're talking about a brain that is literally stuck in a state of chronic stress.
So it's physiological.
Absolutely. When the human nervous system is overwhelmed day after day, emotional blunting, that numbness you mentioned, is actually a biological defense mechanism. The brain shuts down its emotional receptors simply to survive the onslaught of stimuli.
Wow, so it's a biological override.
Precisely. And in these briefings, there is a heavy emphasis on the fact that teachers often suffer from what clinicians call secondary trauma.
Okay, let's pause there for a second. What does secondary trauma actually look like in a typical school setting?
So it means the teacher isn't necessarily the one experiencing the trauma directly, but they are absorbing the shockwaves of it from their students.
Like secondhand smoke almost.
That's a good comparison. Say a child comes into the classroom and confides that their parents had a violent altercation the night before, or A student is dealing with profound food insecurity.
Right.
The teacher listens, absorbs that pain, and tries to help, but they don't have the clinical training or the emotional outlet to process it themselves. Do that 10, 20, 30 times a month, and the emotional weight becomes crushing.
Yeah, I can't even imagine.
But in a classroom, empathy, patience, and connection are the primary tools of the trade. A numb teacher cannot effectively engage. MentalSpace School operates on a very clear core philosophy because of this, which is that a supported teacher is a better teacher.
You cannot separate the adult's well-being from the child's environment.
You really can't.
When you reframe it like that, it changes the entire picture. Like when a teacher has that short fuse, it's not a character flaw, it's a system failure.
Exactly. It's a systemic issue.
And what these briefings make very clear is that the emotional toll on the individual teacher doesn't just stay isolated with that one person. It cascades.
It creates a huge ripple effect.
So what does this all mean? If we know that failing to support teachers breaks the classroom ecosystem, what happens to the school district as a whole? According to the data in our sources, it creates a massive systemic and financial crisis.
A crisis that is honestly highly quantifiable. The source materials point out that teacher burnout is costing U.S. school districts billions of dollars annually.
Wait, billions? With a B?
With a B, yeah.
How does one exhausted teacher deciding to leave the profession cascade into a billion-dollar national crisis? I mean, that sounds wild.
It really comes down to the mechanics of turnover. When a burned-out teacher finally reaches their breaking point and resigns, the district doesn't just lose an educator.
Right, they lose the experience.
They lose the capital they invested in training them, too. Then they have to spend an enormous amount of money recruiting, interviewing, hiring, and onboarding a replacement. And that process takes months.
And in the meantime, the classroom doesn't just pause, right? You had to put someone in that room.
Which means paying for substitute staffing. Subs are expensive, and more importantly, relying on a rotating cast of substitutes completely disrupts the continuity of learning for the students.
Because they don't know the kids.
Exactly. A substitute, no matter how capable, doesn't know where the lesson plan left off on Tuesday. They don't know that a specific student needs extra help with fractions, or that another student gets anxious when called on to read aloud.
That makes total sense. So the whole flow is just broken.
Right. The educational deficit grows, the behavioral issues spike because the routine is broken, and the administrative hours spent managing the chaos skyrocket. It is a massive financial and educational hemorrhage.
Okay, I'm looking at the intervention list MentalSpace School provides in these documents to address this. And I see they don't just treat the kids.
No, they have a whole system for the staff.
Yeah, they list interventions for the staff. Things like wellness workshops, stress management programs, peer support groups, and professional consultation. But I have to push back a little here.
Go for it.
Honestly, wellness has become such a corporate buzzword lately.
Yeah.
Are we really just giving overwhelmed teachers a mandatory deep breathing seminar and calling it a day? Like, does providing a workshop actually move the needle on stopping a billion-dollar turnover crisis?
That is a vital distinction to make. We really have to separate superficial corporate perks from genuine structural support.
Right, because teachers see right through that.
They do. A generic one-off seminar where a consultant tells exhausted teachers to practice mindfulness while they are drowning in secondary trauma is a band-aid, and often it is an insulting one.
Totally. Just breathe through the trauma, guys.
Exactly. But what MentalSpace School is outlining here, specifically the inclusion of ongoing peer support groups and professional consultation, is entirely different. That is infrastructure.
So what does that infrastructure actually look like, say, on a random Tuesday afternoon?
Well, professional consultation means that when a teacher is dealing with a student's crisis, say a student exhibiting self-harm behaviors, the teacher doesn't have to carry that burden alone or guess what to do next.
Oh, that's huge.
Right. They have a direct line to a clinical expert who can say, here's the protocol, here's how we are going to handle this together. Peer support means breaking the isolation of the classroom.
So they aren't just an island anymore.
Yes, giving teachers a structured, safe environment to process that secondary trauma with colleagues who understand exactly what they're going through.
That sounds a lot better than a breathing seminar.
Treating the adults in the room isn't just a nice, warm and fuzzy perk. It is a critical economic and educational strategy. When you stabilize the teacher, you stabilize the classroom environment, which directly improves student outcomes.
And I guess that stops the financial bleeding.
Absolutely, because teachers actually feel capable of staying in their jobs.
Okay, so If we know that failing to support teachers literally hemorrhages billions of dollars and breaks the classroom, at what point does the government step in and say, enough, you have to fix this?
Well, according to these briefings, that point is right now.
Yeah, and that transitions us to the legislative catalyst. The landscape in Georgia is shifting dramatically from schools simply needing help to a legal mandate requiring action.
Yes, the briefings heavily detail the impact of Georgia's HB 268.
And looking at the language here, this isn't just a gentle suggestion or a set of recommended guidelines from the state. There is a hard deadline, July 2026.
It's coming up fast.
By that date, schools are required by law to have implemented behavioral threat assessment teams and active prevention programs.
And this is exactly the intersection where MentalSpace School operates. They step in to help partner schools meet these strict state mandates.
So they do the heavy lifting for the school.
Exactly. They provide the crisis intervention frameworks, the suicide prevention protocols, and the violence prevention programs that the new legislation explicitly demands.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because I think it is easy to look at a bill like HB 268 and see it as just another bureaucratic hurdle for schools to jump through, just more paperwork.
Right, another unfunded mandate.
But based on these documents, it's actually more like a mandatory building code update. Think about it. You would never let a school operate without a functioning fire safety system.
Of course not.
You wouldn't say to a community, well, the district couldn't really afford smoke detectors or sprinklers this year, so let's just hope for the best. So why would we let a school operate without a behavioral threat assessment protocol? It is quite literally life-saving infrastructure.
This raises an important question, though. What is the functional difference between how schools have traditionally operated their counseling departments and what this new legislation actually requires?
Because historically, almost every school has had a guidance counselor on staff.
Right, but a traditional guidance counselor is usually drowning in schedule changes, college applications, or talking down a student who has already gotten into a fight in the cafeteria.
So they are putting out the fires after they start.
Exactly the issue. A traditional model is highly reactive, but a structured violence and suicide prevention program backed by a dedicated behavioral threat assessment team is entirely proactive. It is the smoke detector and the sprinkler system.
So how does a behavioral threat assessment team actually prevent a fire instead of just putting it out? Like, what is the mechanism there?
Sure. It is all about connecting data points that usually exist in complete isolation.
Okay, give me an example.
Imagine a high school. The English teacher reads an essay from a student containing some surprisingly dark, violent themes. On its own, maybe that teacher just thinks the kid is having a rough week.
Right. Teenagers write angsty stuff all the time.
Exactly. Meanwhile, the gym teacher notices the same student has completely stopped socializing and is constantly agitated. And the math teacher notes the student's grades have totally flatlined.
But they never talk to each other about it.
In a traditional system, those three teachers might never compare notes. The warning signs are siloed.
The puzzle pieces never get put together.
Until it is too late. A behavioral threat assessment team trains the staff to identify these micro-indicators of a crisis and creates a centralized hub for reporting them.
Oh, so there's a central system.
Right. It involves licensed clinical professionals taking those puzzle pieces, evaluating the student's overall risk, and de-escalating the situation legally and safely before it ever turns into violence or self-harm.
Because a single, overworked guidance counselor simply cannot be a one-person threat assessment team.
They just don't have the time or the clinical bandwidth. It requires a highly coordinated clinical protocol. That is why districts are turning to specialized external platforms to hit that 2026 deadline.
But, legislation and brilliant prevention programs are utterly useless if the people who actually need them can't access them. Like, a fire extinguisher locked inside a titanium vault doesn't save a burning building.
That is the tragic reality of so much mental health policy.
Which brings us to the final and maybe most critical piece of this puzzle, the practical logistics. How are these services actually delivered? And more importantly, how is the friction removed for the families who need them yesterday?
Delivery and access are always the bottlenecks where well-intentioned mental health initiatives fail.
Yeah, the wait lists are insane.
You can mandate a threat assessment team, but if the resulting recommendation is therapy and the family has to wait 6 months on a waiting list to see a local clinician, the mandate is functionally meaningless.
And according to the brand facts here, MentalSpace School tackles this logistical nightmare from two different angles. First, they offer same-day teletherapy access to licensed therapists.
Which is huge.
But alongside that, they also have dedicated teams of therapists assigned directly to the partner schools. Okay, let's unpack this. Because I can easily see a parent or a teacher raising a skeptical eyebrow at the first part.
The teletherapy part.
Yeah. Is a same-day Zoom call really effective for a student sitting in the nurse's office in the middle of an acute mental health crisis? Or is having that dedicated therapist team actually inside the physical brick and mortar building the real game changer?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, to understand why they deploy both methods, you have to look at the massive gap in traditional care. Offering both modalities solves two completely different but equally urgent problems.
Okay, let's look at the teletherapy component first.
The biggest barrier in modern mental health care is the scheduling delay. When a student is in acute distress, when a teacher notices a critical warning sign and sounds the alarm, that student cannot wait 3 weeks for an intake appointment.
Because the crisis is happening right now.
Exactly. Same-day teletherapy removes the geographic and temporal barriers immediately. It is triage. It gets a licensed professional evaluating the situation, assessing the risk, and stabilizing the student today.
It stops the free fall.
Yes, it provides an immediate safety net. But teletherapy alone lacks environmental context.
Right, a therapist on a screen doesn't know the dynamics of the school hallways.
That is where the dedicated on-site therapist teams become the anchor for long-term stability. An on-site therapist walks the same halls as the students. They collaborate face-to-face with the teachers.
So they build real relationships.
They learn the culture of the school and provide vital continuity of care. So the teletherapy provides the immediate, on-demand access, while the dedicated school teams build the enduring, trusting relationships.
And crucially, this entire delivery system is built on a foundation of strict privacy. The briefings note that the platform is entirely HIPAA and FERPA compliant.
That's a really important distinction for parents.
Yeah, for anyone who isn't familiar, HIPAA is the federal law that protects your medical privacy, ensuring a student's therapy session notes aren't shared inappropriately. But FERPA is just as crucial in this context.
Because it protects their educational records.
Right. This means parents can trust that deeply sensitive clinical mental health data isn't just floating around in the school's general administrative files where anyone can see it.
Maintaining that firewall between medical records and educational records is non-negotiable for building trust with families.
But even with the fastest delivery system, the best on-site teams, and the tightest privacy protocols, there is still the massive elephant in the room. Who pays for this?
Ah, yes. The financial barrier. It is often the absolute final roadblock.
It always comes down to money, doesn't it?
It does. A school can recommend all the therapy in the world, but if the family cannot afford it, the care stops there.
And this is where the documentation gets incredibly specific and practical. MentalSpace School removes those barriers by accepting all major insurance.
That's a huge step.
And looking at the list, they have grouped the big commercial players perfectly. Your Blue Cross Blue Shields, your Cignas, Aetna, United Healthcare, Humana, they cover the standard private market.
But then there's the rest of the list.
Right. Agencies like Peach State, CareSource, AmeriGroup, and the absolute game changer explicitly highlighted here is that they accept Medicaid. This means it is $0 out of pocket for eligible families.
That $0 figure is revolutionary in this space.
It really is.
When we discuss health equity, we have to be realistic about economics. A $50 copay for a therapy session might as well be a $5,000 copay for a single mother working 2 jobs and living paycheck to paycheck.
It is an insurmountable wall.
By deeply integrating Medicaid and ensuring there is no out-of-pocket cost, the system guarantees that a child's access to life-saving suicide prevention or crisis intervention is not determined by their parents' tax bracket.
So picture that single mother. She gets a call from the threat assessment team that her teenager is in crisis.
Terrifying moment.
Instead of the school handing her a pamphlet with a list of expensive private practices and wishing her luck, the school can offer same-day intervention, on-site follow-up, and tell her that it won't cost her a dime out of her grocery budget.
It completely democratizes access to survival.
And it also means the teacher with the degraded battery doesn't have to carry the agonizing worry of wondering if the student they are concerned about will actually be able to afford the help they desperately need. The help is just there.
It creates a seamless, interlocking net. The teacher is supported by professional consultation and peer groups so they don't burn out.
The district is protected too.
Right, the school district meets its strict legislative mandates through expert threat assessment teams, and the student receives immediate, high-quality, zero-cost care through a blend of teletherapy and on-site support.
It is a profound shift in how we view the entire ecosystem of education. As we wrap up today's deep dive, let's just retrace the journey we've taken through these sources.
It's been a lot to cover.
It has. We started by looking at the very real physical and neurological toll of educator burnout, that billion-dollar exhaustion that sleep just cannot fix.
And we saw how solving the K-12 mental health crisis absolutely demands that we treat the adults in the room first.
Recognizing secondary trauma and replacing corporate buzzwords with real structural support.
From there, we examined how legislative mandates, specifically Georgia's HB 268, are forcing districts to transition from a reactive counseling model to a proactive, structured behavioral threat assessment system.
A system that connects the dots before a crisis explodes.
Exactly.
And finally, we unpack the logistics of actually making this work on the ground. We saw how combining same-day teletherapy triage with in-building dedicated teams and critically removing the financial barriers through Medicaid access turns these state mandates from empty paper promises into real-world safety nets.
It is a comprehensive redesign of what structural support looks like in a modern school.
I want you, the listener, to take a second and think back to the educators in your own past, or maybe the ones teaching your kids right now.
We all know at least one.
Think about the teachers who looked exhausted, the ones who seemed to have that short fuse, the ones who appeared emotionally numb and distant. And imagine how profoundly different their experience and your experience in their classroom might have been if this level of systemic, clinical, professional support had been wrapped around them.
It fundamentally changes the capacity of a human being to teach, to inspire, and to care.
It really does. And that leaves us with one final provocative thought to mull over. If schools are increasingly required by law to become these comprehensive, high-pay compliant mental health hubs out of sheer necessity.
For both the students and the adults.
Right. How does that fundamentally change our society's definition of what a school is actually for? Are they still just educational institutions focused on math, reading, and history? Or are they quietly becoming the primary healthcare safety net of the entire community?
That is a massive shift to consider.
And if they're becoming our healthcare safety net, what happens to all of us if we don't keep the teachers' batteries charged?
That is the ultimate question we have to answer.
Something to think about the next time you drop the kids off in the morning or drive past your local high school. Keep diving deep, and we'll see you next time.